Recently in the news, there was a story that received significant attention around the case of Jaskirat Singh Sidhu, who had a deportation hearing over whether he'd be allowed to stay in the country after killing, I believe it was 13 hockey players, injuring another 13. It could have been 16 that died. I don't have the case in front of me. But it generated a lot of discussion. A lot of that discussion was, well, should he just serve time in jail and then be deported, or should he just be deported? And a lot of people that I talked to were surprised to learn that, well, he was sentenced and he's already served his whole sentence. So now the only question is, does he stay in Canada or should he be deported? So I thought it would be a good opportunity to have a look at a few areas of sentencing in Canadian law that might surprise people. In fact, I suspect that across the board, Canadians would be surprised at sentences in a whole host of areas, but we'll just cover a few in today's episode. Hello, my name's Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. So as I indicated in the preamble, the case that got me thinking about this idea of going over some areas of sentencing in Canada that might surprise Canadians was the case of Jaskirat Singh Sidhu. So just as a recap, people may remember that's the truck driver who drove into a bus carrying a hockey team back in 2018. A number of those young people were killed. I believe it was either 13 or 16, and then another 13 were injured. Now, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 8 years jail, but because of Canada's parole laws, essentially, you're almost guaranteed to parole after 1/3, or certainly after 2/3, as long as you're of good behavior, you're not picking up new crimes or infractions while you're in jail. So an 8-year sentence isn't really an 8-year sentence. It's more like 2.5 years that one would actually serve. And Mr. Sidhu, he finished serving the custodial portion of the sentence and got full parole last year. So as I said, the question now isn't should he spend time in a Canadian jail and then be deported, or should he just be deported? The question is, now that he's done serving his jail sentence, should he be deported? Now, that's not the topic of this episode, though. I'm not an immigration lawyer, and it's not an area that I've ever really worked in, although it is an interesting discussion if people are interested in talking about that. What I wanted to do is look at 5 crimes and what the sentencing ranges are there to give viewers a bit of a idea of what sort of sentences people get in Canada. And I think that people might be a bit surprised by some of these. So we're going to talk about possession or production of child pornography and what type of sentences that gets. We're going to talk about what colloquially people would probably refer to as incest cases, sexual abuse of children by parents, what type of sentences they get. We will look at trafficking in drugs and a couple of different drugs, what sort of sentences people get for those. We will look at robbery, armed robbery, robbery of convenience stores and banks, and then we'll look at what hate crimes get, and then you can compare and contrast some of these ranges and see how harshly courts deal with different crimes and which crimes the courts are considering the most heinous and serious crimes. Dealing with child pornography, I'm not going to show case law because I recognize that this could be very troubling to a lot of viewers, some of the facts that get reviewed, but a case that I looked at that gives some good overview of the sentencing provisions is the case of Incest. The link to that is in the show description, and the range that's discussed there is really 18 months to 3 years or more. Mr. Incest himself, he received about 3 years for having in his possession more than 133,000 photos, over 3,000 videos, and making these videos available to other people on the internet. So that's some of the more serious circumstances, other than someone who has a really bad criminal record for this. So that's 3 years for that number of images and videos and making those available to other people. But I've certainly done cases at the lower range, people with no record that have a fewer number of images that weren't, no one had access to them, it was just on a single device, and they got around 18 months. So that gives you a bit of a bracket of the range of sentences that people get in Canada for possession of child pornography. Now, when it comes to sexual assault of children by a parent or someone in a position of authority like a parent, again, look in the show description for a link to the case of DD. It's a 2002 decision, and that specifically paragraph 45 talks about the range, and they describe that for those sorts of cases where there's been multiple incidents over time, you're looking at usually mid to upper single-digit penitentiary time. So we're looking about 5 to 8 years is the range for a parent who has multiple times over years sexually abused a child. And if you want to get more detail on that, you can click the link, look for paragraphs 44 and 45. Just some very disturbing things are discussed there, so that's why I'm not putting that on screen. But again, that gives you an idea of how seriously the courts consider incest type of crimes in Canada and what sort of sentences people get for that. Now, moving on to drug trafficking, there's a very wide range on that. Depends a lot on what sort of drug you're dealing with, and it's evolving over time. Certainly, the sentences that people are getting for fentanyl keep going up and up as more and more people die from consuming fentanyl. Now, there's just so many cases. I'm not going to link a specific case, but I do so many of these cases. I can tell you that as of the recording of this video in early June of 2024, the ranges I'm seeing locally, and the ranges do change from area to area depending on how bad a particular drug is a problem in a given area. But on a conviction for possession of methamphetamine for the purpose of trafficking for a street-level dealer, you could be looking at something around 2 to 3 years, depending on a guilty plea or after trial and first offender or not, and whether there's some mitigating circumstances to the case. Whereas trafficking in fentanyl, that's been steadily going up, and now you're looking at, even on a guilty plea, 4 to 5 years, up into 8, 9, 10 years, getting into double digits, depending on the amounts, if convicted after trial. So the things are going up because of how many people are dying, but again, that gives you a sense of the range. Things like cocaine, that's around similar range to crystal methamphetamine because they look a lot at how deadly these drugs are. Then if we look at robbery, I think robbery is one where people might be a bit surprised at the sentencing range for robberies. I mean, they can range from conditional sentences, especially as I discussed last week, where I talked about how one's race can impact the sentence they receive. People who are Indigenous background or racialized groups, they can often get house arrest for an armed robbery. One case I'm thinking of is Her Majesty the Queen in Lynn, Lyn. It's a 2007 Ontario decision. We'll put the link in the show description. That was a case of an individual slipping a note to a bank teller saying, "Give me $10,000," having a weapon. Money was handed over. Now the money was ultimately recovered and the person pled guilty. They had some pretrial custody, about 100 days, but then they got 2 years of house arrest. You do see cases from that conditional sentence range up into the lower penitentiary range. I've seen a lot of cases of 1 year, like convenience store robberies. 1 year seems to be somewhat of a starting point, and it'll go up from there depending on whether there's aggravating circumstances. So I think people may be surprised at how low robbery sentences are. Bank robberies, those sentences tend to be significantly higher because there's commentaries about how much more danger to the public safety there is and trauma to people employed at banks. I mean, personally, I don't see how a person working at a bank would be traumatized more than someone working at, say, a Circle K, but that seems to be the way the sentencing works. Finally, I think it's worth talking again about hate crimes, and this follows up on episode 199, where I had a look at what sort of sentences people can get for that. So for a more in-depth analysis, I recommend you look at episode 199. But for hate crimes, inciting of hatred, essentially saying mean or hateful things about particular groups, usually it's people getting in trouble, such as the Sohei Chapu case, that is the one I discuss mostly in 199. And you can see all the cases that I quote in there. Generally, it seems to be cases directed towards certain minorities. People are getting 15 months to 2 years plus for that. So that may be higher, or maybe it's lower than people think. Maybe people think that's right on. But I think it's interesting to compare how sending some certain memes online or questioning certain historical events, that can land you around 2 years, which is very similar to trafficking crystal methamphetamine or possessing child pornography. So we can discuss more. I mean, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of different offenses under the criminal code that people can be sentenced for. I mean, I can say, just going back to the Sidhu case we talked at the beginning, 8 years sounds about right to me, as in within the range for dangerous driving causing multiple deaths. So this is the way sentencing works in Canada. And again, we can talk about it more if there's interest, but I thought it would be good to do an episode giving a bit of an overview and some key examples to give people a concept of what sort of sentences are being handed out for some of the more common crimes in Canada. This video, of course, is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, call a lawyer. You can call another lawyer, or if you want to call me, my contact information is listed below. If you have any topics you'd be interested in seeing us discuss, please send a request to the email address listed below or leave a comment in the comments box. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and following us on social media.